Ready? Going.
Thank you for your patience and listening to what I said. I thought it's just very useful to get some basic intro. Thank you. Get some basic intro to we are resuming. Some basic intros on what this technology is, because I don't think it's obvious. It's actually very obvious that people in Southern universities don't understand what it is they're selling. It's not even really obvious the Harvard Business Review understands what they're selling. And that's more worrying. So, hey, we have a panel that you've seen going forward. So I'm actually just going to ask you each that one question, and we'll see how this triggers. And this is meant to be a discussion. So please, it's all over. We have two questions.
Do we need the mic, Steve? Sorry.
No, we don't really need the mic.
No?
Apparently.
We all okay?
As long as everybody can hear us, the recording thing can hear us as well,
yep.
So it's okay. It's always worth asking that. It's better. I did have a whole recording that's completely on mute, so we got that. So we're ready to. I just pressed the one question, which is an incredibly open question. And actually, I will do it in order. So, Kira, what's your position?
My position on what?
Well, who are you as one of the first?
Okay,
You said a bit more.
I have, So, do you want to just a bit more detail?
A little bit more. And what do you think's going on that's interesting in this area? And then we'll ask you that.
Okay.
You can be there too.
Yeah. So, as I said before, my name is Akira Summers, and my background is really in interactive computing. I spent quite a long time working as an embedded programmer, working on game systems. Now I lecture at Birmingham City University. I've been doing a fair amount of work on blockchain-based projects, some of which I can talk about and others I can't. I guess that's largely my background.
Is there anything particularly you'd like to flag under this subject area that's bothering you, or that you think is particularly interesting?
There's so much that's interesting about the blockchain space, and really I think we're really at the beginning of where it's going to go. It's a really difficult question to answer, really, because in essence, a blockchain is really just a store of data, and it can be used in so many different ways. It's like saying, what's a a database is exciting, just when they're made.
They're not glamorous anymore.
Right, but they're used for all sorts of different things, and they're going to be used for all sorts of different things. And I think a lot of the change that's going to come about from blockchains isn't necessarily what becomes technologically possible. In the same way that many of the things that we do with the internet now were previously possible in some form, or some versions of it were possible before. But it's really a change in people's perceptions. It's like there's a lot of things that could change based on the technologies, and the kind of things that I see a lot of are things like data provenance, proving where data's changed. You see things exciting developments in and around things like managing medical records is something that you see, as well as all of the financial space, things to do with gaming, and kind of leading into conversations about the Metaverse, which is, if you think about blockchain and how it interacts with games and how you take assets and manage them in between different types of environments, different types of online environments. That's a really interesting space, I think, going forward. And we don't really know what's going to happen with it. A lot of people talk about the Metaverse as if it's kind of one thing, but really, it's a concept that's kind of growing, and could a large Metaverse could emerge from any one of a number of different places that we don't really know about. So I think at the moment, really, the space has clearly got a lot of potential to develop in lots of different ways, and I think anybody who tells you that they know where it's going to go is probably overconfident in themselves.
Is that a seamless thing falling on to give you, Jack, a chance to say the same, sort of introduce yourself as, we should just riff basically.
Yeah, so my background and the relations I have to blockchain, Bitcoin, NFTs, all through kind of esports and games. My knowledge of the topic itself and the detail of it is definitely not going to be be as much as my peers here today. But what's interesting to me is the social implications and a lot of the development. I think is that perception, which I think you highlighted like very importantly, is that we're entering this increasingly digital space where a lot of our lives have got to be increasingly digital. And I think what's important to me is who has access to actually go, pursue that digital experience. Because, as you can, mentions of Bored Ape Club, for example, is a very exclusive club, and it's designed to be exclusive to maintain the value of the assets. But that closes off a lot of people to actually being part of those communities, and having access to what ends up being very circular and positively circular in the sense of Bored Ape, where they push each other's value up within the community, which makes it less and less and less accessible.
So they'll have a season 3.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll have a season 4,
Yeah.
season 5.
Yeah.
So they'll get more people coming on.
Yeah, but it's it's still who's in now, and how's that going to stop other people accessing it. So that will be kind of my line of inquiry, I imagine, for the evening. But I think there's a lot, and I think it's a hot topic as well. So I think it's worthwhile saying that's where my main questions are, as well as those sustainable implications, as well as what's been done to get the value, get the data that we're discussing at this point in time.
It's so early days. Like remember the internet when you used to have the dial-up, the noise that would go. That is the clunkiness of using MetaMask and all the weird stuff now they have to do an NFT. We're just going to go past that when people start making things that are faster and smoother. The user experience is going to get better.
Yeah, I think a lot of the same questions, like why would I go on the internet? When I can just be a believer, I can just walk in the shop, and it's that kind of change of perception that we is a difference in value.
I always say to people, if they're sort of sceptical about NFTs or they're challenging what I might be talking about, I say, what do you like doing? Like I said to you, Steve, like, what's your passion? Like, what's your thing on a Sunday night? Because as soon as you find your thing that you like, it might be golf, might be whatever, there'll be NFT applied to that. It's just like a token, like a club. But a lot of people say, I don't like apes.
Yeah,
okay.
no reason why you should like apes, particularly when they cost $1 million.
There'll be something else for you.
Can I ask a question in regards to, because the world's kind of evolving pretty fast with stuff, and guys like myself who were readily keeping up with stuff from back in year.com when they had a crash that was supposed to be and it didn't happen, and then the advent of computers getting faster and faster and technology is getting more and more complex. How does NFTs fit within the role of cybersecurity, which seems to be the thing that a lot of companies are worried about, cybersecurity and getting data breaches and stuff? How secure can we take our NFTs in terms of value with stuff like cybersecurity floating about?
In terms of value, it depends what you're asking. It depends if you're asking, if I buy an NFT, will it be secure? Because your assets that are managed by the blockchains, are typically very secure. Because they're secured by maths, right? Basically, at the end of the day.
All those hashes.
Yeah, and there are things that can happen. There are things that can happen to mean that you're relieved of your assets by somebody sitting behind a computer somewhere else. And there are vulnerabilities with the blockchain. There are 51% attacks where people can take control of the power. If they provide like 51% of the hash power, then they can start rewriting the blockchain. If they provide actually just over 50%.
It's actually just like Parliament in that sense. As soon as you've got 51%, you have control.
Yeah.
And it's rather more difficult to do with blockchain.
But there are other vulnerabilities related to smart contracts, things like re-entrancy attacks, and various different things related to the management of blockchain. But typically, they're super secure, right? If you're talking about the value of your NFT, well, NFTs are a speculative asset, right? Just like art. If you go out and you buy a painting by somebody, that value of that painting could go up, it could go down. And it's just, buy an NFT. If you're an art dealer, you've got a really good idea for the value of that in the future, then by all means, go out and buy yourself an NFT. If you're going out and speculating, right, and you're just like, oh, I think maybe this will be worth a whole bunch of money in the future. You know, I have friends who've bought models of Batman and the Joker or whatever from collections who are sure that they're going to be worth a lot of money in the future. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I mean, who knows? I think one of the things that I see when I'm looking at these systems is that the value of these assets are tied to the systems that they're on, right? So one of the things that you've got to be aware of with these NFTs is that it's not just the value of the asset that goes up and down, right? It's like you have an asset that's tied to a particular system. In the real world, I can pick up a model that I bought and take it to a different auction house, right? If the Ethereum network, suddenly nobody's interested anymore. Now, I'm not saying I see that happening, you know, it's very well established at this point, but you know, there's plenty of other systems doing NFTs. If you look at Solana and whatever, there's all sorts of other systems. Say they experience an issue and they stop trading, then what happens to your NFTs? Nobody's using that system anymore. Then, so it's also like the system that indexes it that you have to worry about. So I don't know whether that.
Yeah, I mean, and more about, as I say, you're saying that the security is based around the system that the asset or the NFTs attached to.
Yeah.
So would we need to worry about other people getting access, like you said, 51% and it's gone, kind of thing,
Yeah.
or are they evolving at a pace that stops people from doing this max
So
kind of thing?
as I understand it, by far the largest majority of people who lose their assets do so via the same kind of scams that people get in the real world, right? Yeah, so exposing your keys, yeah, so exposing your passwords and stuff, so essentially, yeah, or being tricked into sending something to somebody, so your phishing attacks, stuff like that. It's all like the same kind of stuff that people do in the real world anyway.
Can you use a hard wallet for NFTs?
Yeah.
Wallet.
Yeah, because a hard wallet is basically, just something that signs your transactions from the inside.
So you can use it to store your
There's no
NFTs.
reason why you should be able to.
I mean, there's these classic stories of people losing the wallet or losing the password, and you know, begging the county council to dig up the waste bin, dig out the waste site to find where the things. I mean, I think this 51% attack is actually really A, very unlikely, but B, as the value of these things fall, it becomes slightly more likely. Because you are reliant on people doing the consensus, and they do it not just because they love it, but because they're getting a payoff. And so as the value of the thing falls, in extreme cases, you could get to the situation where it's just not possible for a lot of people.
See, when I look at blockchain networks, if you look at a blockchain network, right, when I talk specifically about 51% attacks, what happens is, like Steve was saying, you've got people trying to guess the hash, so they've got a computer that's going this hash, that hash, that hash, and when they find one, then they'll be able to add the block onto it, right? Which means that if you've got most of the computers, or most of the hash powers, let's say, on the network belonging to you, then you can start rewriting the blockchain. And it's too much for me to explain how that works, but if you're interested,
That's the next session.
Yeah.
So I think it's seriously
But,
not very likely at the moment.
Yeah, but the thing is right. So most now, all of these ASIC machines that are specialized to generate hashes are sitting mining on the Bitcoin network, right? That's where the money is. That's where people are sat at. But you have other networks that have got proof of work mining as well that are also generating hashes. If you've got a smaller network with less miners on, it's less of an issue to overpower that system. Because, I mean, if you've got a small fraction and you've got people who've got large amounts of hash power that could just completely overpower a smaller system, then, you know, I worry to some extent about smaller systems that use proof of work.
In fact, to be honest, the fact that you really worry about it says, yes, it's something that we should be aware of. You can
I guess you'll find most of the modern networks are moving away from proof of work.
Yes, I mean, Ethereum are the biggest one who are moving to proof of stake, where, you know, you don't gain so much of an advantage. You know, all you're doing is put up a stake and being part of a random thing. So it's less of an independent. It's not so simple.
I think it should be about as well, not holding on to Bitcoin and Ethereum and watching it grow or rise. I think it should be about making something and then adding a token or an NFT to it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emphasis on like, oh, go and get your Bitcoin and buy a bit of this and buy a bit of that and buy a bit of that and like see which ones go up and down. I'm like, how about you just go and scan something in the real world, NFT it, sell it, and do it that way. Like,
Yeah.
You don't always have to be sitting there waiting. You can just go and do stuff.
Yeah, that's the point. Another point. Yeah, I was thinking about saying a similar thing because if you're waiting for an asset to go up and down, yeah, your assets will be going up and down. But the people who are really going to succeed are the people who are building, the people who are creating stuff that way. In sort of 2, 3, 4 years time, they'll have something.
Yeah.
And these things they tend to go in cycles anyway, dictated by the halving patterns.
I've literally scanned 330 items on my phone in 6 months and they earned $320. It's not a massive amount of money, but anyone in here can do it on your phone tomorrow. Download Polycam, it's not my app, someone else's app. Download Polycam, start scanning, £5 a month, scan this chair, scan a dead pigeon. These are things that I've sold on the internet.
I've seen the dead pigeon. Yeah.
Scan the chair, load it onto Polycam, load it onto Sketchfab. This is not even NFT stuff, this is just 3D model being sold on the internet. People just buy them, $6, $10. Tyrone's doing the same thing. He's been saying, what was your last sale? Item.
Trainer. Scan the trainer.
So everyone, scan all these trainers, put them on the internet. I tell my kids, 18, 16 and 3.5, she doesn't do much scanning. I tell the kids, scan everything, because when it was 2007, everyone said, film everything. If you've got a YouTube channel, you should start filming things. Now the YouTube channel's doing really well, and now's the time to start scanning everything. 3D models are going to be the currency for this metaverse in the world.
By the way, the YouTube thing actually does, and the internet as well, actually in general, do show how these things tend to develop. They tend to become the obsessive frenzy, is the phrase that's used, and people do scan, film everything, and then they discover what's worth filming and what they can actually get a return on. But probably not all trainers, these aren't trainers, but you know, probably not all trainers will actually get. Nobody will buy these shoes. Yeah? So,
They definitely would.
okay.
1,000%.
All right,
Yeah.
so we'll investigate that later.
I think the dead pigeon sold 3 times. On the internet.
Yeah, you did say
Literally
it.
weird. So then we're selling that multiple times, but what I'm trying to say to film and TV industry is if, like in Warwick, there's Lord Leicester Hospital or St Mary's Church or Warwick Castle, big medieval places, the BBC pay Lord Leicester 30 grand a year, this blew my mind, to keep a room in the Lord Leicester set like a old set for Downton Abbey or whatever they film there. So now we went and scanned the front of it, and now I go to BBC and say, don't bother bringing all that catering bus and everything there anymore. Let's go and find a studio in London and put the model on the wall, and you can shoot outside Lord Leicester with snow or rain or whatever you want. So in my mind, the NFT 3D model space goes into the realms of we're going to have the Warwick Castle and St Mary's Church and all these 3D models, but you'll be able to go on and have a fraction of that NFT that earns money every month because we're selling it to Hollywood or TV companies.
See, I see a lot of value in the 3D modelling, right? Like, I went to a sport conference a few months ago and there was 3 different companies there trying to sell to big sports companies to pay them to scan and then create their stadium in the metaverse, right? Because that's a mammoth task, right? If someone came to you and was like, I'd like you to develop the Emirates, right, and as a 3D development, that's a mammoth task, which is extremely expensive for them and very profitable for the people doing it, right? And then moving forwards with the discussions around the metaverse, with games like Fortnite actually creating entire events in virtual spaces, you can see where that's going. But what about the 2D things, right? Where's that value and why do you see items spiraling in that space?
In the 2D space?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, people said the same thing about like fantasy.
Yeah.
And people say the same thing about Jackson's Pollock's. People say the same thing about every single aspect of art. I could buy a copy of Van Gogh's Sunflowers, just a print of it, and put it on my wall.
Yeah.
Why would I want to buy the original? It's the same, right? All I've got then is like, I mean, I just own it, but I can look at it anyway. It's the same with like looking at a graphic on a computer. Fine, you've just got a receipt for it, right? It just says you own it. Why do you want that when you could look at it anyway? Why would I want
I think it's the level of prolific, how prolific the systems are in creating that art that changes the perception of value. So, for example, Van Gogh was a very prolific artist, in fact, one of the most prolific artists. So, but if you still own the Van Gogh, so they're worth a lot of money, right? But they're not as prolific as the systems that are making multiplications of a single asset with slight variations, right?
I hate that 10,000 versions of different colours.
Yeah.
That's just the thing that's been bred out of ape.
Yeah.
I think if I was to do a collection now, it'd be like 5 or like 10,000.
Yeah.
It's just a number they all use.
So do you see moving away from that heavy multiplication model?
Yeah, that generation of 10,000 models is a pure thing to sell 10,000 versions of.
Yeah.
But it only works if you've got a decent membership or a decent club. You release 10,000 of flower trees, you're just going to sell none. It has to be a club. The Bored Ape thing was just hit at the right time.
Yeah.
It just came at the right time. If you try to copy it now, like millions of people have,
it doesn't
just
work. Yeah, that's why I was asking that question, because you see it time and time again. You see people going, I've got this opportunity, I'm going to make 10,000 versions of this, and then they don't get any return on any of the versions of that thing.
You've got to have after value.
Yeah.
After value is a key thing. I mean, but that, by the way, you just try out 10,000 copies, 10,000 people imitating. That's exactly the sort of thing that happens with technology. Anything actually becomes fashionable. People get obsessive. They do all these copies, and the ones that actually work and add value, are the ones that survive. A lot of things don't survive.
It's really funny because people say the same. Like if you look about Bitcoin, people are like, "Why is Bitcoin worth anything?" Because it isn't actually anything.
Yeah.
It's one of the really interesting things about the blockchain space is that you start asking yourself questions about value. What does value come from? And then you think about money, and the difference then between a system where people are pushing around digital zeros on a computer in a centralized system that everybody accepts is worth something, dollars, pounds, and things, and then extending that to a system that is owned by multiple people just seems to break something in people's minds. But then, equally, when you then extend that from fungible items like dollars and tokens for currency to then non-fungible items, then that again breaks something in some people. It's really interesting, and I don't, pretend to have all the answers for everything, but yeah, that's how I think about it.
OpenSea took one of my NFTs down, deleted it. So I actually turned it off because it broke some rules in the headline. And I was talking to Ty about it the other day, but they won't put it back on. I never sold it, but it was 20 episodes of a YouTube channel that I made, and I said, in the future, if you buy this NFT for 1 ETH, you can have 50% of all royalties of this 20-season thing in the future, and it hit some bit that they wouldn't allow because it was to do with extra royalties in the future, and they just took it off, cancelled it, and won't talk about it all week.
It's interesting, just kind of rule they've invented actually, because what you were doing was actually offering them something that had some actual concrete value.
And they're a middleman.
Theory.
They're OpenSea and other places like that are a middleman. If you can just write straight to the blockchain with your own code team, it's easier. So you don't having to use that middleman.
It's ironic that the blockchain sells itself on bypassing processes, but actually you're talking about bypassing the blockchain.
It's like eBay just sat in the middle of you.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of intermediaries around. People don't realise quite so much. I mean, we have new intermediaries basically. Airbnb, all that kind of stuff. In effect, in some ways, a hotel chain is an intermediary between you and the place to stay. And Airbnb is a new and much lighter weight intermediary. So But I mean, money, we are used to it. But actually, the meaning of money has changed tremendously over time. There's some guy who wrote a book about money the first 5,000 years or whatever. And money, it's still a physical thing, but actually, it changed radically. The nature of what money changed when, firstly, hire purchase was introduced, because money appeared out of nowhere through hire purchase agreements, and then the real killer was the invention of the credit card, which has totally transformed. In fact, I'm not going to deal any going any deeper into that. You were going to ask a question.
I was going to ask, following on from what you were saying about working in the Metaverse as it's being created, and then also the role of 2D within that. So if you were to have a 2D item, for example, could you place that within?
If you had a 3D version of it, with VFriends, it's gone, but we took the 2D VFriends drawings that Gary V did, and my friends got Grateful Gar, just a weird drawing. Then they made a version of that was like a 3D version, and then we had an augmented reality version of it. We sent it to them, and now we're chatting to them to create a series of 3D models from their 2D NFTs. We could do the same thing with Bored Ape, because they all started off as 2D. So I want to bring them into 3D.
Yeah, because where I was coming from that concept was your Van Gogh, and you have your whatever copies of that, and then you could theoretically place it in strategic places. So you went to the Emirates, and you wanted to have a Van Gogh in the Gulf, you know, to offer that as a.
I mean, what you're seeing, by the way, is you've got a new technology and it gives you new possibilities. And you know, not every single creative idea is a brilliant creative idea. But you know, what they say, let 1,000 schools contend. That was a Chinese phrase. When you've got 1,000 schools contending, one or two will turn out to be real winners and do something you never thought was possible.
I think it'd be more interesting for a concert type thing or an event to get a famous artist who's already established to make the flyer for the event and then have the ticket as an NFT for the event. Yeah. And now there's only 10,000 of these tickets that are all specifically some artist, and they're all on the blockchain that you went to that thing in 22 or I talk about that because the Beatles the stubs on eBay sell now for hundreds of pounds. If you went to the first Beatles gig, you're like, well, here's the stub. But it's going to be the same thing with the ticket in the future.
By the way, what you're seeing is collaborative co-creation, collaborative idea developing, and there's plenty of opportunity for that. That's always a nice thing. Go drop something. By the way, sorry.
I just wanted to get your views on private versus public blockchain, especially when you think of enterprise level applications. There's always a inhibition around public blockchain because of decentralization of aspects, whereas enterprise applications built on blockchain want that level of control. So
yeah, you might not want it to be totally public. You might not want people to see it.
Share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, really, it depends on what the application is. So, I mean, yeah. So, but typically, a lot of the stuff that you want to be doing will be on permission blockchains, and I guess some of that is because access will be restricted, normally by a series of certificates and membership service providers. They'll restrict basically access to a blockchain system. But then that also has an impact on, for example, the consensus mechanisms that you choose. So you don't need to do things like proof of work. You don't really have tokens to do proof of stake. So you use things like proof of elapsed time, POET, and other consensus mechanisms that are more lightweight, that don't require tokens, that don't require massive amounts of hashing, so you can relax in some ways around that. So yeah.
I guess there's some instances where you wouldn't have to. You could carry on using your server with the security that you've already got. It just depends whether it adds value for you to use blockchain in an enterprise way.
Yeah.
One of the nice things to think about open blockchain is it is open, so people can subscribe and add. I know it's not quite so simple as this. I mean, when it's a centralised control thing, you have got a gatekeeper of one kind or another. Depends, of course, on how you set it up. But you tend to have a gatekeeper of controlling what can be done by who. And that places restrictions. Somebody has asked a question offline. Well, they raised an observation that you could trace the provenance, I can't remember whether it's avocados or whatever, very quickly using blockchain. Now, actually, there's a couple of things there. One, you could have done that with a computer anyhow. But two, things like that tend to be in environments where there's a very wide range of suppliers. And the ability to just enroll yourself in there, the openness is actually useful. There's plenty of markets where if you had a controlled process, it would take 1,000 years to implement. An uncontrolled process, at least in principle, could be quicker and more effective, particularly in that kind of environment. Have I misled people there?
No, that's
Good, good. That's reassuring.
I wanted to have your thoughts about how we can align with art as an investment trend with NFTs, but not like just using NFTs that we're using right now. How about monetizing real-time art pieces by using NFTs? So NFTs will not be the product, but it can be a tool in the future. I wanted to have your opinion.
You mean like a tool to fund a project?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, you could fund, if you're an established person with an established reputation for doing good art, good video, good photos, you could definitely put a website out there and say, look, I've got 3 projects, this, it's got a token, it's fractionalized. You can take an NFT and fractionalize it to like 100 or 1,000 different pieces, leading back to one NFT at the top. You can sell those fractions and fund the project. Whether that's art, you've just got to find the artist who wants to do that.
I mean, a killer thing there is actually the quality of the stuff. If it hasn't got an inherent value. I don't know if you've actually looked at any of the AI kind of art being produced recently. A lot of it is absolutely appallingly trashy. Even frankly, I think some of the stuff they're putting from the fix is not really quite as appealing as that.
I feel bad at laughing at the word AI art.
They're gone.
No, it just sounds like a weird concept to think about. And then it being having value. It's like, if humans made AI, then who's the art guy?
Well, in fact, we get into the realms of what gives art value, and that's very definitely a complicated subject, which you should probably cover in another session, or even now if you want. Jack, do you want to say something?
No, I think actually, Steve, having your elaboration on that piece would be really valuable.
What was I saying? I think there is a very direct analogy between art, 3D, electronic, digital art, and what people also call real art. I think you can buy a poster. In fact, if you look around here, what we've got, there's a genuine original artwork there. It's a sort of abstract, probably dated on a landscape. And then there's something that I guess is a 10-issue print, 50 issue. And then the other one is just something that's been printed. And they're all legitimate art. People are all prepared to pay for good reasons. They want to decorate the place in certain amounts of money. Where it gets crazy and gets out of hand is the millions and millions of dollars on people, which not.
I was going to say it gets interesting if I go and 3D scan it and then put it on Sketchfab for 20 quid. Then it's an awkward conversation, or a nice conversation with the artist to say, I just walked in and scanned it. It's the same conversation we have with historical properties at the moment, like Warwick Castle. I bought a ticket and went in and scanned the trebuchet and put it on the internet for £200, and then they rang me, and now we're working with them. But this is the things that I'm trying to say to museums and art galleries. I can literally walk in with my phone and scan your piece and then leave. There's going to have to be something that goes in these places that says you can only take 100 photos, or 5. Because you're allowed to take a selfie, because that's going to be done everywhere. But I look weird when I'm in a museum taking 250 images of a head. But that's going to get almost illegal eventually.
There's all sorts of really weird issues that come up around NFTs. Because people at the moment, people are selling NFTs like their ownership of something, and really, largely they're not. And even where you might argue that it is, it will be unclear. You know, like the legal position. If I buy an NFT of something, do I then own it? Does it then belong to me, or am I just licensing something? And then obviously, the globe is a patchwork of different legal systems. So it's not something I'm qualified to answer with, but I am actually working with somebody on this at the moment, and various different complications to do with different blockchains and
because if I take 250 photos of this chair and sell it to you as an OBJ model, okay, fine. I could say that chair was owned by someone else and I'm giving you a representation of it and you're using it and selling it. Now what if I gave you 250 raw photos and then said, I'm selling you photos. Go and make me the model over here with this free software, and then is that might be a cycle.
These things can be quite complicated. I mean, if you took that chair and made a copy of it in a upholstery workshop somewhere, well, actually they do have some IP right in that chair. So if you just copy it, however, enforcing that IP, right?
Yeah.
And how far it goes.
I spent 3 hours in Debenhams recently. doing
Right.
doing scans of their little sofas and stuff, and then putting them on Sketchfab because they look good in VR. It's a massive grey area.
Have you told Devon?
No.
Yeah.
But I've had friends that have had their models taken down because they were like infringement on a dinosaur copyright, where someone had a 3D model of a dinosaur, someone scanned it, put it online, got told to take it down. So it is going to happen. But the museums are going to have a bit of a shock when they find some of their items in film and TV.
I mean, one of the things you're doing is effectively being a guerrilla artist or guerrilla, whatever you want to call it, and you're there bringing to people's attention, and that really puts them on the spot. If you talk theoretically about could we turn this into a 3D asset, then you've got a whole, well, for one thing, the whole art establishment won't understand what the heck you're talking about. But then the next thing, if you've just done it, you bring the issue to a head. Now, if you did it and ran away with the money, that'd be a slightly different story.
What about on the other side? It's probably a big question for you because you're the one going around scanning everything in front of you. But what I have seen online is the other instance. Because for me, actually, I'm actually a big fan of the idea that you go away and go with your own creativity and initiative, effectively earn something from doing something. Right? That's great for an individual. But then, what about the point where that then goes back to that big corporation figure? Like I saw someone made a 3D model of a Disney character based on like their child's toy that they had. They then modified it and made it a very good 3D printing asset.
Yeah.
And then they went to Disney World a few years later, and that had been made and blown up, and it was at the entrance to like a roller coaster.
With the modification that they've made.
It was the exact same. It was their 3D model. They took it, they printed it, they painted it, they put it outside of the
not much you could do.
roller
Is there?
coaster.
You're just a single guy and it's Disney. And okay,
exactly.
Just take a selfie with it and go,
Yeah.
cool. NFT the selfie of you with it.
Yeah, that's a bit NFT. Actually, strictly, you do have some legal rights. It's enforcing them, which is quite difficult.
Exactly, and that's where those legal ramifications come in. It's all about ownership, and there is a massive grey area around ownership. When you're effectively dipping in and out of reality. Those grey areas only get more grey.
I mean, there is a history, effectively, which happens with all technologies that they get. I mean, cars were invented. People drove them. People drove them too fast. People had accidents. Then they invented car insurance. But then they also invented things like the laws for speed limits and things like that. It didn't happen instantly. It was quite a long, rather tedious process. And by the way, it didn't always work well. They came with stupid laws where you have to walk with a flag in front of the car. Stupid laws like that. So it was a process. And I think the same sort of thing will happen here. Whether it's adequate is another question. Whether it goes on quickly enough, that's another question too.
There'll always be corporations there's always be corporations trying to own something, process, and it's always the first one to court with the deepest pockets, and very much like Nissan versus the guy that owned Nissan.com website, and they tried as much as possible with Nissan cars, blah blah blah. You need to, we have ownership of that website, and he stood his ground to, I think, $20 million later, they still haven't got it. And I think it's going to prove problematic when you take a scan picture of something that someone else has created and has the copyright to, or has the IP to, and then you put that out there. Especially things that are supposed to remain private. If you go to someone's private collection and there's got the only one chaise lounge that was made by Jean-Paul Gaultier or something like that, never to be seen by anyone else, and you then start doing that, I think that's going to be where it brings everything to a head.
I do think there's going to be a load of legislation. In fact, I'm not very worried about criticism and something, but I suspect at some point they're going to get some load of serious lawsuits, and they're going to be sued for tons of money for selling people for $55 million or whatever it was. Because if you try and resell people, in fact, the guy who bought the NFT of the first tweet bought it for about $3 million. He tried to resell it, and he was offered $8,000. Now he's a nice man, I'm sure he'll accept that. But there are plenty of bad tempered Americans who won't accept that kind of financial loss, and that will bring this sort of thing to the courts and cause a lot of problems.
As I say, ironically, doesn't this bring regulation to a inherently deregulated environment?
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, so what was the point at that point? Like, if at the end of the day we all prefer regulation, it feels nicer when truth and justice gets through, like, we sort of fall back on those laws that won't always work, as you said, and some of them may not actually benefit everyone. And so, yeah.
It's a process. I mean, in fact, there was a question which is sort of triggered, which was on the phone, it was from LinkedIn, and it was the second one here: can centralised finance and decentralised finance coexist? To which the answer is yes, of course, because they are. They are coexisting. The supplementary question is, what are some of the regulations that can be transferred? I don't know the answer there yet. Maybe a few other people know better than me. But there almost certainly is a process that will be gone through to find the right regulation. I mean, I don't want to searingly indict the current government, but the online safety bill is a very dubious piece of work. And that's the first big attempt in the UK to regulate social media. I'm a bit unfair, probably, but that's generally speaking. And I'm very definitely unfair on the online safety bill, but that's one of their first attempts to regulate it. It's not as bad, probably it's worse than the Red Flag Act, actually, but it's not. Anyway, it's a process. Something else just.
I think it's probably also worth adding, because I'm a big fan of like poking holes in Bitcoin and a lot of online stuff generally, despite the fact I kind of work in that realm. It's also worth pointing out the organic repercussions of certain online patterns. Like a good example, which I guess is not really like Bitcoin related, but you mentioned, person owning a certain website, getting in there, they're in that, they sell that to Nissan for however much money, at the end of the day they'll fight and they'll continue to inflate that value. There's also like organic knock-on effects that are quite positive. Like a good example is the .gg domain. So that's Guernsey, that's what it is. But in esports, if you finish a video game, right, you say good game, which is GG. You go, oh, GG at the end of the game, every single game. But because that's such a term that's held by the gaming and esports community, if you want to set up a website, let's say I want to start a new esports club and I want to call it 1 Mill Street or whatever, I'd call it, my domain would be 1millstreet.gg, because that's what everybody has, right? .gg came out and esports was already very rich, and there was a lot of organisations already in that space and looking to find a more effective domain, right? There was so much invested and so many things bought in Guernsey that it opened up a whole new economy for the island. They had to build servers to make, it's almost entirely because gamers want to browse other gamers' websites. But it created thousands of jobs, so there will be those minute and interesting organic positive implications of actually creating jobs, because the internet, almost randomly, and I guess that kind of where it comes back to Bitcoin, these random searches for certain things then have these kind of positive implications. So I can kind of, I guess, question for the panel in terms of like, where do you see those other positive things happening from Bitcoin? So it's very easy to go, you're burning all these trees or whatever, but like, where do you see positive effects coming from it?
Yeah, for me it's the royalties thing. Everyone here can earn from artists, whether that's musicians or film or TV, or like you mentioned about funding a project. Literally, it removes that gatekeeper for everyone here. If you know someone around the corner who's got a cool NFT project and is good at singing, for example, I'll go and buy a bit of his NFT, because in 2-3 years' time it might be something I can earn money from. I'm only interested in that, the after value of an NFT. I'm not interested in a JPEG that might go up or down. I want to find the latest person that is really good at something and then try and do something with their NFT. That'd be my option. Positive.
By the way, this is a very fundamental thing. If you go right back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which frankly we are mostly products of, that's why we're relatively comfortable with it, rather than busy growing wheat. A lot of that was enabled by the invention of banks, which were a means of raising funding. So what you just identified is another channel for identifying fundraising funding for micro projects which would never get a chance to rebate. Sorry.
I mean, there's one of the things that you get from cryptocurrencies is like, so one of the projects that I'm looking at is working with some people who want to bank unbanked people. You know, there's the possibility for people to get an app on their phone. People who've never had access to bank accounts or anywhere near a bank account, but have a cell phone, you know, with an internet connection, can receive money and send money to people. So being able to have access, but also access to other economic models outside the currencies that they use for day-to-day transactions. So we use pounds and people use dollars and things like that. But in El Salvador, people you hear a lot about people now that it's an accepted form of currency. People can opt out of their currencies and invest in other currencies. And I think that's something that's going to be left behind from cryptocurrencies, and that and a lot of other sort of more boring stuff. You know, whether it's changes in how we do logistics between transferring products and things like that, whether it's like rather than paying a solicitor to transfer the deed of your house and those things are managed. So just different things being managed, whether it's receipts for sculptures or artwork being transferred, real world artwork, whether it's something else. But I guess a lot of those things will be able to be managed more easily and more transparently on a blockchain. You know, so I think there'll be a lot of that.
But how transparent is it? Like, because how much of a level of understanding do you have to have to be able to actually say that this is transparent? Like, obviously, I could be super transparent, but I could be super transparent in a language I made up. Then it's not super transparent.
Yeah, okay, right. So, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on Block Explorer and looked through the contents of a blockchain, and it probably seems fairly intimidating the first few times that you go on it. But it is all there, and you can read it, and if you do know what you're looking for, then you can find a whole bunch of different things. And you know, actually, there's a whole really interesting industry that people have got based on looking at transactions in blockchains and trying to figure out what's going on. You know, the FBI and the CIA have branches where they do that specifically, where they can look and use a whole bunch of really, really interesting techniques. Again, you can read about in the book about how they identify people using a blockchain. How they track transactions from one person to another. This is all, I guess, it demonstrates that it is possible, and people do sit and watch these things. They watch for large transactions. They go, okay. And if you follow people on Twitter or in other places, if you listen or read articles about it, you'll realise there's a lot of people who sit and watch what's happening on the blockchain and go, okay, this got transferred from them. We think that means that these people have done that, or these people are not going to invest in you. You can see, watching people are really clever. They'll sit, they'll figure a whole load of stuff out.
So what you get is a whole series of new roles being invented as a result of the new technology, which, by the way, happened with cars as well. You know, you had to have garages after cars, you had to have petrol stations and things like that. It generated them, and so it wasn't always a happy story. So all these people who used to clear the streets, clear the horses left, they're not employed anymore, but hopefully they got a job in the garage. Historically, I don't mean us here, as a society, we've not always been very systematic or good at handling that kind of change. And it's too often it's more or less accident that comes out as good and bad. More good than more bad. But it's a process.
It's always demonised. Technology is always demonised, and the nostalgic stuff is always put on a pedestal. It's like, we used to like books more. Well, people like the internet now. It's just like how things change.
But with the transparency issue, I mean that's the things that I said were examples of people looking at the contents of a blockchain, right? But you've got to imagine if you're a kind of company that's using a blockchain to verify your product, right? Say I'm making a car, and I want to show everybody that my rubber has come from this high quality rubber source, and all these components have come from these high quality suppliers, and this is ethical. Then I want to be as open as possible, right? I want to provide these briefs to people, so I'm going to be even more eager. I'm not just going to let people find that stuff on the blockchain. I want to present it to people. So I think you'll find more of that in the future. And you can actually find companies now We'll say, look, you can follow our products in the blockchain, you can see what we've produced, and you can trace our products to find that they are ethical and sources. So I think you'll see more of that in the future.
We didn't say we'd finish this bit at 7, but I think we're sort of still going on, so we can carry on for a bit longer until people lose their enthusiasm. There's legislation going through where providers, importers of actually coffee in this particular case, have produced it's come from a sustainable source. Blockchain is a means, it's not the only one, it's definitely a means, and it's probably pretty good because a lot of coffee producers are not particularly technologically mature. So they're not very capable of going through very complicated processes. It's a means of being able to demonstrate that. So it's genuinely useful. I mean, the reason I flicked onto this forum was that probably shouldn't bother. It mentioned Central African Republic. Now, there's a lot of contention probably, I don't think anyone wants to talk about it, whether it's a good thing, but most people in Central African Republic don't have bank accounts. Yeah, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's enabling, in theory at least, those people to find another way of access to money. I didn't want to finish the conversation.
I think I've got more of an observation than I have a question, but I think what I'm hearing is we're trying to take what we already know and apply it to something that is yet to establish itself. So your example about these people that are watching it would either be a stockbroker or a lawyer. And when I bought my house, there's no way that I could have read that contract without a lawyer to decipher that for me. So we may in future, 10, 15 years time, be having kind of those equivalent roles that are all shaped around sort of demystifying this and being that broker to try and kind of get the most out of it. The other observation that I have supporting smaller businesses, I can see that the corporates and the brands are going to kind of invest in terms of content creation and invest some that they would do into reels or stories or the next level kind of content, VR, exactly, Alex, what's the future kind of trend. So I can see the big brands kind of investing in that, and we're seeing that within esports, that the big brands are kind of looking for the next level content to get young eyes on their brand. But where are the opportunities? So I suppose this is the question. Where are the opportunities for smaller brands apart from content creation? So if they don't feel comfortable to create their own content, how do they get into this world and either protect their own brand or benefit from blockchain as they are, their bank and their kind of current setup?
I feel like it's an individual thing for the company. It'd be like a chat with the company to say, what are you trying to do? I don't know the enterprise that you mentioned, but it's all about that. If it was Mill Street, then you would talk about that whole, is there a club, is there a membership, is starting at that level? Is it to do with the production line of something? Do you need to show the authenticity of where something's come from? Do
they need to show off? Are they B Corp? Are they going for B Corp status and they need to show off their sustainability? Yeah. And they have all of their sustainability credentials on a blockchain. I know a lot of the video games companies are looking at how green they are, and does that documentation sit publicly somewhere and they can click a link that says, look at us go? With
blockchain stuff and things that are public, it was interesting when I went to the Home Office in the UK, they showed me a system. I gave them my MetaMask ID or my hash or whatever it is, and it was visualization tool, just massive screen, my head in the middle, every transaction that I'd ever done, really visual, like logos of companies, OpenSea and stuff like that. That was the thing that was really powerful to see. And that makes me think about in the future when you've bought 50 things, or you've got 50 NFTs, or on your blockchain it shows that you've bought this. Now brands will just be searching open wallets like yours to see who do I target to. They'll be like, Claire did this and this and this, and she likes Phantom of the Opera, and she likes this and theatre and all this, whatever. They'll search based on open wallets. It's
Right.
a bit far in the future.
So they'll target me more than I'm already being targeted.
It's
Hey!
not
The future's
necessarily
now.
a good thing.
But you do remember when you used to
Cookies.
sit on the sofa at home and get given adverts for brands and stuff that you were not interested in. I much prefer seeing adverts for like scanning or Star Wars than I do for like clothes or washing products. I'm trying to think of something I'm not interested in. Now it's more targeted. People moan about it. I'm fine with that. I don't want to see stuff that I
It
don't.
can be abused as well for
Yeah.
political
It can be
reasons.
abused.
Just don't look at it.
I mean, what you talk about, we were always imagined, because we're in the West somehow, everything's perfect or everything's dreadful. And the truth is, it's everything in life is usually somewhere in between. I mean, I will mention Facebook. If you want to have targeted ads, Facebook's actually, they're not very good at it, but they're better than most of the alternatives.
It's also free to use. You can just turn it
Yeah.
off.
Well, yeah. So you have a control point. which
People
you
moan
didn't-
about Facebook and Twitter. I'm like, how much do you pay to use that?
Yeah, you have a control point to turn the beastie off.
Don't use it.
So you've enabled the control point and your ads are
Yeah, but I
more
like it.
targeted than
People say, yeah, but I like it because I can keep in touch with my family. Okay, use it then.
range of values that you gain from it. And that's definitely a subject for a different talk. I don't know, we can carry on. There's no reason we shouldn't. Probably, I was going to do a quick sum up and the thanks really. You can judge where, according to Carlos Perez, what happens with technology is it appears, it erupts, it goes, if it's a big and important and interesting one, it tends to get frenzy. And NFTs, etc., are very definitely in the frenzy phase. Then usually you get a crisis. I mean, she bases this on big things like the rail shares crash of 1840, things like that. That's just one random example. And then, people settle down and railways become sensible things. And actually, eventually, they start to become mature and we start hating them. But use, misuse, and then things get beaten into control. What's happened with NFTs is they were in the NFT phase. And even in the 2 or 3 weeks of doing this, they've moved into crisis, I think. You don't lose 2/3 of your value without having that kind of crisis.
Ethereum's about 900 now, and it used to be about 3,500 or 4,000.
I mean, you hear about this, but I mean, like when you look at the value over time, what it was, I mean, like, okay, so it's down like what, on a year? But how is it over the past year? Zoom out.
Yeah.
It's still actually well up over 3 years, but at the moment it's actually pretty stable and slightly going up. I checked this morning. But it's at least arguably in a crisis.
It's a great time to buy an Ethereum for under £1,000.
Now you have to evaluate for yourself whether that's a good deal
That's
or
not
not.
financial.
That is not financial
You
advice.
also
It
have
is
to have
advice.
a grant to be able to spend on it.
I remember thinking,
Issue.
£3,500.
Come on,
Now you think, no,
you got a question.
Just thinking about NFTs being in the frenzy phase. The last thing I read said that, and this was maybe like towards the end of last year, 350,000 people, individuals own NFTs in the world. Like multiple wallets, billions of wallets, but 350,000 individuals. Is that a frenzy or is that not?
Well, in one sense, it's not a very big thing, is it? So in terms of the world, that's how many people we got? Nearer to 10 billion than 3 billion, So it's a very small proportion. By the way, those 350,000 people can cause low end of trouble. The 1929 crash, not everybody owned shares, but the stock market crash. In fact, I didn't own anything in 2008 either. But the stock market crash still affected my career prospects, etc. So one thing, now it's not so important to do all that. That's a very valid point of view. And in fact, to be honest, I think it's less important than 1929 crash. But
It's just demonised, yeah. People like to have that. They look for like we talked about the killing trees thing.
This one's fake.
Yeah, this one. Google likes this one. But it's like demonising that. It's like we don't talk about the other things that kill the environment because everyone just really sells loads of stories and clicks if you talk about crypto NFTs killing the environment. Demonised. Everyone's talking about NFTs because it's like easy to search, isn't it? Hashtag NFT everywhere.
What do you see? How do you see the barrier of entry evolving? Because that's my huge issue, right? You've got to invest 900 quid or whatever, or you've got to understand these things, or you've got to.
You'll be on Instagram. You'll be on Facebook for free. You'll upload news to Instagram, and you'll own the NFT with Instagram as your name, and you'll be able to accept likes on that Instagram post, like we talked about. you sign the like thing first. On MetaMask, when you're on OpenSea, you can go and sign the wallet and then press like on someone's item, but it has to verify you on MetaMask first to do the like. That's cool. I like that. That's like not a fake like. That means that someone did actually verify with their face and then press like.
Yeah, but you've got to understand all those values that you've just described. Also own all those gadgets effectively to get to that point. Like, how do you see it evolving? Obviously, it's the same discussion with internet, right? Like, still a very small percentage of people, realistically, globally, actually have access to internet.
When you say understand the Apple gadget, you mean the upload process of uploading the photo to Instagram?
Yeah.
No, actually owning the phone to start that process.
Yeah.
Owning the phone.
Yeah. But like beyond the existing systematic issue that a lack of people have access to a phone or a laptop or whatever to get onto that point.
Yeah.
Like, where's lots of people are earning this much money. Where's the open dialogue about how obviously we're doing it here today? It's one of the reasons we're doing it here today. Like, where's the dialogue about this in schools, right? Because if I'm an esports fan, which to be honest a lot of young people are, right? I'm a 13-year-old team solo mid fan, for example, right? Name of the esports team, for those not aware, big American organisation. They got a name sponsorship from a Bitcoin. Do you remember?
I don't know. It was probably one of the big.
But effectively, a very big Bitcoin sponsored them, and their name became the Bitcoin name. Right now, it's a household thing for them. Now it's something that's gone from I just really like watching these people play FIFA to I'm now thinking about this thing that holds massive value that can create great wins and losses. Like, what's there to educate people as we move in that direction? Because I feel like Bitcoin's moved at a much faster speed than education around the industry has.
I mean, if you think about it, these questions have always existed, right? People should have. We don't teach how money works and where value comes from and all of these things at school. They're not standard topics.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why we get to a point where we've got these new things emerging, or at least new concepts. They're concepts that are new for most people, it's really interesting to think of, well, what generates value? Is it scarcity? Or is it just something just worth the last value that it's sold for? There's all sorts of aspects that come into the value of something and how that value changes.
Yeah, I was just thinking actually this is probably what we're seeing now is there's a lot more to debate here. Yeah, these people aren't going. I mean, you have to stop and get out the door. But they're not planning on going. We can have more dialogue, and I hope, in one sense, this isn't the last session. What I did want to do is wrap up at least this one, and I know you've got something to say those in a second. Don't let anything miss. Yeah, look, thanks for that. Great. Thank you to the audience. I think you qualified one of the best audiences we've had. Yeah, thank you to Mari, who's actually a real sponsor, etc. of this, made this thing happen. I don't know if she entirely expected it to happen like this, but Claire, organising things. We're not allowed to say, Boss Thomason, I think that's what he calls himself, but we're not allowed to say that. We're not allowed to say Team Thomason. Thank you to the design group and Mill Street for helping this. Actually, before I finish, amazing. You're part of the design group. You want to tell us something. And it's to do with feedback, so that will disappear in a second. So before you go, or something, I hope it's been fun, I hope it's informative, I hope it's enabled the debate. That's a kind of killer thing we're after. That's why I call this a disruptive thinking series. You hear things here, you haven't heard anything else. Clicking, it's supposed to work. I don't know how.
Someone should make an NFT projector that always works.
Hey, hang on.
So we have a quick survey. This will be an interactive survey, and we will be pleased if you scan the QR code on your phones and engage us in the survey.
See, traditionally what happens is people rush out the door and don't do the survey. It would be nice if you did do the survey. And I'm going to stop completely. So thank you very much. Having a fab audience, fab panel, and this sort of Mark.
Just thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pam, for doing that. It was terrific. And I guess for the feedback, you know, for all the students who have helped coordinate and arrange and promote and put this out there, thank you very much indeed for your efforts. And it's really good. We really do genuinely appreciate all the feedback that you can give us. We're trying to make a meaningful connection between some of the connections we have at Warwick Uni with some of the community, the connections we have here at Mill Street. And we want to make it work. You know, we want to grow a community here, and we want to be part of that growth. So we really do appreciate the feedback that you can give us, so that we can tailor. If this worked, then we can justify doing it again. You know, and if it wasn't working for you, then you know we can find out how we can make it better and what we can do, or if there's other things you'd like to hear about, all that kind of stuff. We're just really open to hearing that. So just a big thank you once again to the panel for your time this evening.
Thank you for good work.
Did the QR code work for anybody? Were they able to?